That is the horrendous and heartbreaking video that shook the world, sparked this latest push for military action. Our experts here to analyze all the consequences. Let's start with how the world is reacting to President Obama's decision to delay a strike with ABC's chief global affairs anchor Christiane Amanpour in London. And Christiane, this came on the heels of the failed vote in the British Parliament. And the one ally it appeared the president had was President Francois Hollande of France, the last phone call he made before going out and addressing the United States.
That's exactly right. And according to all sources, Francois Hollande, the president of France, is still willing to go ahead with the United States if the president does give the order to strike against Syria. That has been discussed in France. He's sticking by it, despite what happened in England, to his closest military European power. And today, the French president and his national security team, whether it's the defense secretary and others there, are meeting to discuss. And there will be a debate in the French National Assembly, their parliament, this Wednesday, but there will not be a vote, unlike what happened in Britain earlier this week, last week.
Meanwhile, we're also seeing the Arab League vote. So far, they have not explicitly authorized or approved of a U.S. strike either. But we just heard Secretary Kerry say that he believes that over the next week or two before a strike, as Congress is getting ready to vote, that they will be able to build support in the international community. Is that what you're seeing? Is that what you're hearing? And how about in England? Any chance of Prime Minister David Cameron going back, going for another vote and getting a win?
Well, on that last point, we were really wondering whether this might happen, because all the talk about what happened in the British Parliament has pointed the finger at incompetence. Incompetence at the whip, incompetence of gathering the votes, of knowing what was going on under their noses before this vote. But today, two senior members of the British government, both the Foreign Secretary William Hague, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, their Secretary of the Treasury George Osborne, have indicated very strongly that the Prime Minister will not seek another vote in Parliament. Therefore, Britain is staying on the sidelines for this one. And that is a huge shock to not only the United States, but to the rest of the world, because for decades, Britain has been the reliable partner to any kind of military operation. And now France will probably be one of the only ones standing with the United States in a military strike. And of course, the point is, though, your question, looking at these pictures and those that you just aired just now, is there any way the president cannot give the order? And I think many of the Western governments believe there's no way, that this is not just ugly, it's unacceptable under international law, and the use of weapons of mass destruction needs to be responded to.
And that is certainly the signal Secretary Kerry sent today. Christiane Amanpour, thanks very much.
Yeah.
We have already seen allies of President Assad try some nuisance cyber attacks against U.S. targets like Twitter and the New York Times. But are they capable of more serious retaliation? That's the concern of federal law enforcement. Our senior justice correspondent Pierre Thomas is here with more on that. And Pierre, you're hearing that the FBI has stepped up surveillance of Syrians living here in the U.S.
George, U.S. law enforcement officials are taking no chances. The FBI wants to know if the Syrian government has covert agents and sympathizers in the U.S. So the FBI is planning possibly hundreds of interviews targeting Syrians living in America. And George, the FBI will also be investigating whether Hezbollah has the people or the capacity to launch an assault on the homeland. And as you said, there's real concern about the potential for cyber attacks. The question is whether the Syrian government or hacking groups that support the Assad regime can interfere with our banking or cut off our power supplies and telecommunications.
And this is coming at a time of heightened concern. We're coming up on the anniversary of 9/11, always a time when everyone is on full alert.
George, there's no soft way of putting this. Law enforcement sources tell me that we're entering a dangerous phase. Not only do you have the potential ramifications surrounding Syria, the 9/11 anniversary is less than 2 weeks away. They're very mindful of the Libya Benghazi attack on last year's 9/11 anniversary. And after that, we had the Boston Marathon bombings. As one official reminded me, the threats to the U.S. embassies of a few weeks ago, he said there are many intelligence officials who believe those attacks may have been simply postponed. He said the threat still remains, so George, is going to be an intense few weeks.
Okay, Pierre Thomas, let's bring this back to the panel right now. And Martha, Pierre brings up the possibility of retaliation here in the United States. Of course, the front lines for any possible retaliation, Israel, and whether Hezbollah, Iran, or Syria will retaliate against with a missile strike against Israel.
Well, I think the feeling in Israel, and I was in Israel this week, at first was very much, yes, we would be the place where they would retaliate. But most senior Israeli officials don't believe it will happen. but the people seem to believe that. There was absolute chaos, people racing for gas masks, trying to get prepared for whatever might happen. I think you've heard Hezbollah say if it was a limited strike, we would probably not get involved, but sorry, I don't really trust anything coming out of anybody's mouths over there that they won't do anything. I'm also struck by the language even from Syria. Syria has even said, we'll defend ourselves. They have not actually threatened an attack, but believe me, that region is braced.
So do you buy that, Vali Nasr, that President Assad perhaps could just absorb an attack?
Well, he politically has to make a lot of noise. But look at the message we're giving to him. We will punish you because you crossed the red line, but we will not interfere in deciding the outcome of the war, which is what he really cares about. So I think he has no incentive to get the Congress of the United States to intervene, to level the playing field, to try to take over the management of this war. He knows we have to hit him, so let us hit him and then go about our business. And I think then he wants to get on with finishing off the civil war.
And General Cartwright, so much of this idea of hitting back at Assad, in part because of those horrific pictures, but also the word credibility comes back into play. All of the military, the entire region, also looking at Iran and wondering the kind of message it sends to Iran if we do not strike in the wake of an attack like this.
I think it's critical here, and that's probably one of the audiences we have to pay close attention to. And my assumption would be that certainly the administration has reached out to Israel and talked to Israel about what this red line and the deferral of this red line for some period of time, the implications of that for Israel, and how that will be interpreted by the Israeli people. And so, you know, to me, this is one of the key audiences. On the idea of retribution or of a strike back on the part of Syria, the likelihood of that probably right now is very low, the likelihood of it being successful. But it ought to be part of the strategy of this limited strike to ensure that that ability is impaired and put in question in the eyes of the Syrians.
So you make it more difficult, but you have to have a strike that is calibrated enough so that it also doesn't provoke an attack, so Assad has a choice at least.
Exactly, and he's vulnerable in several areas. I mean, in the Middle East, people don't worry about the Syrian army. The strength of the Syrians is their defenses, their air defenses, and that's where they're vulnerable. Those are generally fixed, they're very expensive, they can't be repaired easily, so they become a very interesting target in managing this idea of retribution.
Meanwhile, Martha, the whole specter of a possible conflict with Iran clearly weighing on the president and his advisors as well. Part of the calculation of going to Congress now is that they believe that it's possible sometime in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, they're going to have to go to Congress and get authorization for a strike against Iran as well.
That's exactly right. And that's what the Israelis are watching as well so carefully. That's what Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm sure, when the president came out yesterday, and I suspect he got some advance warning about that, probably was thinking, what kind of message are we sending to Iran? And to prepare this nation exactly that. One of the things I do think about here, though, is we still don't have, you heard Secretary Kerry talk about a political solution. What is the political solution here? And will this kind of strike help with the political solution? I don't think so.
What's the answer?
Well, I think a political solution is very difficult because a political solution would involve dealing with somebody who has used chemical weapons and would potentially have to be part of the solution to the crisis. I think now it's very difficult for us to engage in any kind of a diplomatic negotiation. And I also think the audience is beyond just Iran. We have to look at North Korea, China, Russia. Something big has happened. The president has passed American foreign policy to Congress. I think everybody around the world is going to calibrate the way in which they read American reaction to a host of events.
And I think we can all agree something big has happened. Thank you all for your insight and analysis.